So I want to thank you, Mark, for taking the time today to be here with these interviews and welcome you to Elder Speak.
Thank you.
So in this interview series, we are unpacking the relationship with spiritual communities, with gurus, with teachers. And so I wanted to get a sense to begin what your relationship with a spiritual community has been. How did that come about for you?
Well, I grew up in the church, I think what's called a Protestant non-conformist church. So it's a gospel hall. And the primary school that I went to was Church of England, the Anglican Church. And my secondary school was Anglican as well, I suppose. And when I left home and grew up a bit, I embraced Rastafari. But I've also been a part of Islamic communities and the yoga community and the Nuwabian community. So I consider myself a student of comparative and world religion to some extent.
Okay, so very eclectic then.
Very, extremely, yes.
Mm-hmm. And with regards to leaving a community, were there any of those communities that you had left in the past?
Well, yeah, I mean, I stopped going to the gospel hall because I was a teenager in the 70s, and being that sort of Christian was quite an embarrassment for an aspiring modern teenager as I was then. I left Rastafari for a period of time. I've left Islam, and I've left the yoga community to an extent, even though I might have left the community, but I've still got fond memories there, and people I've known there, mentors and other students and teachers that have, guided my way. So even though I've left, I've taken something with me, if you like. I suppose that's the way to describe it.
And so with the yoga community that you were with, how long were you there and how did you get there?
I'll say about 4 years. I can't quite remember how I got there. I just remember turning up at the Putney Centre and asking the receptionist if they welcome strangers. And I went in and had my first yoga class, which was really quite a spectacular occasion in my life. And then I went on studying yoga, being invited to satsang, finally going, getting more involved, doing my teacher training, coming back, teaching outside the centre, staying in the centre I was a karma yogi, but I used to go to staff meetings as well. I was very encouraged by the director at the time. I was and other students said that she had hopes that I would sort of take and spread yoga to the Black community. So that was interesting.
And that brings up an interesting question. So when you were involved in this community, were there very many Black instructors or students that you were a part of?
No, I was the only one. There were a couple of senior students when I went to New York to do my teacher training. But I think I was the only Black teacher in the Putney Centre at the time. And it was at a time before the proliferation of yoga, if you like. And so there weren't a lot of Black people like practicing really, and with all that we knew of, we didn't have a community as such,
And what time period was that?
That was the early 90s. perhaps 89 to 84, 85, something like that.
So in your experience there, you were sort of really involved in the community then. You were
Totally,
right in.
Yes, but I'm born in December, so that's how I do things. It's all or nothing, and I reserve the right to change my mind.
Right.
I just reserved the right to change my mind. But I was very involved. I did a lot of teaching. I think I was teaching 13 classes at one point a week, and I was doing a lot of driving for the centre and a lot of karma yoga. Yeah, it's good fun. Good fun.
So what was it about this particular lineage of yoga that you were attracted to? What attracted you about that?
Well, the fact that it was a lineage. I mean, I'd had a few flirtations with yoga before, and I can't quite remember, as I said, how I got to the London Centre, the Shivananda Centre. But I mean, here was a system of yoga that was said to go back millennia and to be handed down orally and by example. Now, that was the first thing. The second thing that quite attracted me was, there was a woman director, so it wasn't like only men can be teachers, like women could be teachers and swamis and brahmacharis and karma yogis, just essentially there's this kind of equaling of the sexes, which was good. That was attractive, as were all the teachers I saw in the teaching uniforms. I thought they had a particular energy that I wanted. And then I'd see, other yogis and yoginis, and I just, as you do, you see people think, I just want to be like them. How do you, okay, so they're here, they're doing this, so then I want to do this because I want to be like that. And that's nothing that could ever be said. No one could be an apologist for anything. I want to see what you look like and how I feel your energy.
And was there anyone that was sort of a role model or a teacher for you in this community that you looked up to?
Well, there were several, really. There were several. I looked up to one young Swami. I mean, I looked up to him, and I was critical of him as well, in my heart. So the director and the Swami, who was, I suppose, the second in command, a lot of the teachers and a lot of the students in karma yogis, they all had something to teach me. And I'm there to learn. This is that kind of environment where you're there to learn. So I mean, you might go to class and somebody says, right, this is how you do the sun salutation, but then you might be eating dinner and somebody says something about how to do it, or the practice, or meditation, or something that you think, yeah, that's right. I want to take that. I want to keep that. That's fantastic. And some people just had to walk past me and I learned something. Yeah, I went to the yoga show once in Earl's Court, a place called Earl's Court in London. It's huge yoga. You can buy anything. You can buy beads, mats, yoga uniforms, anything you want to spend your money on to get enlightened, you can. And I was drawn to some Tibetan monks, and I went over and spoke to them. And they said that they'd spent, I think it was about 7 years on a meditation retreat, and they'd come straight to London. They're all in the midst of all this. And I just had the feeling that they were looking straight through me, which was a bit disconcerting, but quite, it drew me to them, because they seemed real,
In your community, obviously like-minded people would come together, and you were one of those like minds. What was that like for you? What was the community part like?
Oh, it was great. It was great. It was great. It was really supportive and interesting. I really quite enjoyed it.
Were there parts to that aspect that weren't so lovable or embracing?
Well, there we go. So the director was a bully. So she didn't like you, she would bully you. And the second in command, he didn't showed me things that showed me that he was quite homophobic. And we had one incidence where, see, I was given quite a lot of freedom, so I wasn't staffed. So I'd go home once every 2 weeks. I was on state benefits at the time, so I'd go home every 2 weeks and sort that out. And I was also allowed sort of day release. And I went to Brixton, and as you probably know, Brixton is a black centre. It was a big black centre, a lot of black people living. And you know, we had this altar with you know, elephants and, you know, Shivas and all this. But they'd also have from time to time this, like the white Jesus. So I went to Brixton and brought a picture of the Black Madonna and Child. And I went and showed it to the director. I just showed it to her and she said, oh, she said, do you want to, I said, can I put this on the altar? So she said, yeah. So when I went to put it on the altar, the other Swami, he was there, said, oh, who's that? I said, well, that's the Black Madonna and Child. And Swamiji said I could put it on the altar. And he said to me, well, I suppose Jesus could have looked like anything, really. And it's one of those, you know, those situations where somebody says something to you and it's only when you get home, you think, I wish I'd said that to him or her. And even these years later, I wish I said, yeah, he could look anything like anything. He could look like anything at all, except probably the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus that you seem to worship or revere.
Mm-hmm. And in your experience in this particular community, where I would assume it's a yoga community, so you know it's about embracing and accepting and seeing everyone as equal. Did you find that was prevalent there? Was there an acceptance? I mean, you spoke about picking up on a bit of homophobia, and then you know the comments of this particular Swami. Tell me more about your experience with that.
Well, I suppose, I mean, I went on teacher training, so I flew to New York and stayed, big excitements, stayed in the New York Centre for a couple of days and then got a lift in the back of a pickup truck up into the mountains where the ashram was, listening to Van Morrison. That was quite an experience as well, just watching New York unfold as a countryside rather than a city. And I got to the ashram and got out of the van and I'm all stiff. It's 2-hour journeys, it's stiff, and went around. And I went into the library and there was a guitar there. And I picked up the guitar and I started to play Redemption Song. You know Redemption Song? Bob Marley's Redemption Song. And they said, oh, no, you can't play that. That reggae music is too rajasic, which means it's too emotional and pulsatingly rhythmic. You have to sing Indian bhajans or European classical music. Now, I've sung European classical music during my childhood, but if you start telling me that reggae music is bad for my soul, I start to get issues. So that was the first thing. So I wanted to go home. I had a big lump in my throat. I thought, I don't want to be around all these white people anymore. I want to go home. But there I was for the next month. And then 2 days later, the van brought some more students up, and there was a black woman from Harlem who saved it for me. We got close during our teacher training. So I had someone who understood me rather than people who found me quite exotic, I suppose. So one of the other trainees said, well, she wouldn't get to meet a man like me and speak to a man like me under normal circumstances. But that just makes me exotic. So that's not, I mean, personally, you know, I quite liked her, but the fact that she doesn't know anything about my culture, even though we've all got the same, the highest parts of our culture are all the same, but the other parts are not. So I know what English people eat and do, but they don't necessarily know what I do, or American people, you know, Europeans don't necessarily know. So you just feel, you feel a bit like a doll, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And did you find that treatment in the community was different for you?
No, not generally speaking. I mean, and that's the nature of so-called racism, isn't it? I mean, most people just took me for who I was. I was given the name Shankara, which I loved. I was given all the names that I've got were given to me, and Shankara just had a sound about it that I loved. It sounded really swashbuckling and you know, brave and strong, and you know, everybody, most people treated me extremely well and very intimately well, dealing with, you know, the higher aspects of culture, the things that we can easily share, like spirituality and yoga practice and these kinds of things. But when some Indian people would visit the center, they'd walk past me like I didn't exist, and then go up to a picture of Swami Shivananda and start, you know, getting all worked up about him. And of course, I've faced racism from Indian people, you know, a lot. I live in England, I live in London, so a lot. But I mean, I already knew the nature of the thing. I already knew the name of the game, really, in that sense. And since then, people have said things that just sort of really confirm that. You know, up until quite recently, an Indian guy I know went to the Shivananda ashram in India. And he came back and he said that his experience of being an Indian in the Shivananda ashram in India was that these European people had hold of this thing and they were holding onto it very tightly, like it was theirs, and they were going to give it out in little bits, but they owned it. Which I think is nonsense, and we will get to that, I think. Well, I'm sure we will. We'll get to that. But it's not like, I mean, I most of the people that I remember were fantastic. One of the Swamis, a Swami came from, I'd already left and I'd been away for some years, and I went back to see how it felt, and there was a new Swami. I wasn't really that impressed with it. And another Swami came from Europe, and we were talking about the Caribbean, and I had to do some work in a shed. I had a shed where they kept the tools, the gardening tools. And I said, people live in that in the Caribbean. And he said, yeah, so I suppose they do some work and then go and sit on the beach. I'm like, what? Yeah, there's a lot of poverty in Jamaica. You know, you're talking about sitting on the beach. Nobody's got any time to sit. Any people that's got time to sit on the beach is tourists and people who look like you. So, but, you know, they're authority figures, you know, and they're supposed to be holier than me. So I just feel it, and I'm like, just hitch up in myself, just skive off this Swami. And I knew he was skiving off. He wasn't outside skiving off. So one afternoon I saw him. I needed him for something. I couldn't find him. And then he appeared later on in the afternoon. I said, "Oh, where were you? I couldn't find you." He said he fell asleep at his books. I was like, yeah, okay. Oh dear, oh dear.
So you started to go into an area there where I'd love to take this conversation. As it's something that I've noticed also taking place within many structures in our global culture, but especially in the structures of spiritual communities and with spiritual teachers and swamis and such, and that is the power differential that can be portrayed or experienced by students. And it seems like a lot of corruption or power, abuse of power has been coming out in the open a lot more these days. And it seems that every particular lineage has a story to accompany that. Some parties are for the story, some parties are against the story. A lot of turmoil in that way. What did you see, or did you see any of that? You touched on it a little bit there in within the community and within the founding members of this lineage.
A little bit, a little bit, but I couldn't really put my finger on that's abusive. So the director we'd do a thing called Yoga 5. So you had Yoga 1 for beginners. Yoga 4 was pretty impossible. And Yoga 5, like you had to be, I don't know, some sort of contortionist or gymnast or a swami or something. But we used to laugh about it, and the director used to correct students with her feet. She'd kick you into position. And I mean, I thought that was just about, you know, being tough enough, because I can be tough enough. You know, I study the art of peace. You have to be tough. You know, you have to be tough. It's tough. Now, when I went on teacher training, I saw the East Coast director who was leading the teacher training and his brahmachari. From a window one day, I saw them coming from probably his trailer or something. I wasn't quite sure what happened around the back there. And I could see that they were a couple, and other people would say that they were close, but I didn't necessarily see that as an abuse of power until much more recently, after Swami Vishnudevananda passed away. He left, and with his brahmachari they got married and had raised a family. And I remember in satsang he was saying that all the good people in the world should get together and have children. So I mean, I saw all that, but it wasn't obvious that there was an abuse of power. I suppose the director of the London Centre was very fierce at times, very, very fierce. And I saw a little bit of bullying from the other Swami towards this brahmachari who, he was gay and he was trying to deal with a lot of stuff about being gay. So he decided to take the vows of brahmachari to kind of straighten himself out. And I mean, that's what we all do when we embrace celibacy. It gives us a chance to sort ourselves out, hopefully. So I did see those things, not very much. Yeah, so that wasn't particularly what made me leave. But yeah.
So tell us about what was it that made you leave then?
Well, so we've got this, you know, like I've got a background of suffering racism throughout my school life, throughout my whole life. But, you know, people disregarding me because of my race. I'd done teacher training, been told that reggae music was illegal. I complained to the Swamis that it seemed that the arts, when they had artistic things, it was very culturally specific. At that time, they all had Indian dancers would come in, you know, but Indian dancers don't necessarily represent me. It's like, you know, yeah, that doesn't necessarily represent my lineage. But what actually, so all these things were piling up one on top of the other. And I was upstairs in the room on my bunk reading a book by Swami Shivananda, and he was saying everybody should have culture like the Indians. I mean, look at the Bushman in Africa. Nobody wants to be like a Bushman. And I pretty much got up and walked out of the centre, packed up and left when I read that. That was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. And, you know, just so, I mean, experience of racism and growing as a man and working to being a yogi and developing sacred masculinity, you're always kind of working on this stuff and processing it, thinking about it, working your way through it.
And where have you come now? What is your perspective around that?
Around
what you saw, what you read in that book. How do you process that?
Well, I thought about that today. If you're going to denigrate Bushman culture and indigenous culture, you, to my mind, can't be a fully enlightened being. Now, even though you're not a fully enlightened being, you might be more enlightened than I am. You might be more disciplined than I am. And you might very well be able to teach me things that I need to know and put into practice. So Swami Shivananda would say, simple living and high thinking. Sleep a little, talk a little, eat a little, meditate a little, do pranayama a little, do asana a little. These, you know, so that's that. But yeah, I was never, you know, I could never. Even in the yoga center, being black was a problem. At the same time, I was learning that yoga actually, the yoga asanas and different things about yoga were chiseled on the temples built by the Nile Valley Africans, and that there was a synergy between the Dravidian cultures in India and Memphis before the Aryan invasion and the writing of the Vedas. So if you tell me that yoga came from India, which everybody does, everybody on this side, they say, well, yoga came from India. The extension to that is we came from India because English, the language that we're using now, came from Sanskrit. So you have Asians and then you have Caucasians, and the Caucasian is the offspring of the Asians. Now, the Asians, they're made up of Aryans and Dravidians, and there's a long struggle for power in that area that we now call India between the Aryans and the indigenous populations. There was a synergy between the Dravidian culture and Memphis and practices of meditation and yoga. I mean, they've got the pharaoh chiseled into stone, so somebody might come and write a book, chiseled into stone, sitting in a cross-legged meditative position on a lotus flower. I mean, well, you know, and the Vedas were written, what, 3000 BC? That's not hardly the beginning of time, is it really? So there's all that. So on the other side, you've got black people saying, well, yeah, we're glad that you're doing yoga because it's our thing, really. They took it from us. But they weren't necessarily doing the practice. So it's a bit like, you know, yeah, we could be black, but then you've got white people who are really sincerely doing the work. So unless you're black and doing the work, the white people might overtake you. I don't know. This is my story, so there's no way to skirt around it. We have to just how it is, you know. But ask me another question.
Yes, I appreciate that. I appreciate your story. So do you think that we need spiritual community to evolve ourselves? What is your take on that? Do you think it's possible on one's own?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense of I'm not particularly part of a spiritual community at the moment. Not particularly. More of my practice is on my own by myself, whether that's to do with Rastafari or as a yogi or yoga student, I should say, probably. But to learn asanas and to learn how to meditate and to learn how to do pranayama properly and safely, I think you do need someone to show you what to do and what not to do, and how much to do, and the whys and wherefores and what not to do, and so on, so that you can then establish a safe practice that you're able to take forward into your life. So I mean, I teach yoga. I think I'm a good yoga teacher. People say they enjoy my classes. So it's very beneficial. I don't know whether it's necessary. You see, the other thing is, nowadays your spirituality could be a little bit of a pick and mix affair. So when I was a child, we used to have pick and mix. So you get a bag in the shop and you take different sweets and put them all in, and at the end you pay and you get 3 of your favorites and something. Yeah. So if you just go and take something from here and there and here and there, you might not dive into the depths of what you need to you might not dive into the depths of what you might need to in one practice. I remember telling someone about the sun salutation. So we do the sun salutation. So they started doing the sun salutation, and I saw them 2 weeks later, a couple of weeks later, and said, "Hey, how's the sun salutation going on?" And they said, "Fine. Have you heard about the moon salutation?" And I thought, "Yeah, we haven't done, like I haven't finished with the sun salutation yet, much less the moon salutation and all the other salutations that there could possibly be." So there's a whole range of spiritual practices that may or may not be effective, but you can't do all of them because you'd spread yourself too thin, wouldn't you? You wouldn't be able to focus. So I believe that certain things are given to you by the universe or the creator. So I was given yoga, and if people are drawn to yoga and want me to teach them or come to a class that I'm teaching, then that's something that I'm able to give to them from the creator. Whereas if I just go on YouTube and look at like how to be a better human being or how to find happiness, it's just too much information.
So it's important to focus in, even though like yourself, there may be an eclecticism, but there needs to be points where we focus also.
Yeah, because you've got to learn something, and then you've got to do it for the rest of your life, haven't you? As I say, I mean, I've met Muslims that, you know, I think they're the best human beings I've ever seen. And Christians, I've been in a few Christian church choirs in my travels. I was involved in the Pentecostal church as well for a while in, say, 2000, around them time. I was in the choir, Pentecostal church choir, a Nigerian Pentecostal church choir, which is another whole interesting little saga. Great, you know, music, you know.
So there are many benefits to being in a spiritual community. Do you think that there are any hindrances or ways that the ways that communities may operate that would hinder the student? Or
Yeah, I mean, the things about communities and organizations and groups. So you have this thing, group think. So that means that you don't think as an individual, you don't think for yourself, you're just told what to do. So one of the drawbacks about the Shivananda Center was that you couldn't really ask questions. You couldn't really ask deep, meaningful questions. Because you just get fobbed off. So there was an orthodoxy, but there's orthodoxy in every organization, community that I've been a part of. And I don't necessarily subscribe to some or all of that orthodoxy. So, for instance, Swami Vishnu Devananda passed away, and they said that it was his Mahasamadhi. So I said to the Swami, how do you know that that was his Mahasamadhi? Because you're telling me that it was, but I don't know that it was or wasn't. So how do you know? And I never really got an answer to that question. That's an important question, isn't it? Somebody's got to have a Mahasamadhi. So how do you know that it was a Mahasamadhi? Are you there also so that you can see and confirm that it was a Mahasamadhi, or were you told that it was, or do you want it to have been because it suits the narrative? I was in church and I knew another a brother, a black man from another church. He's my senior, he's my elder, and he was actually a director of education in this borough in the 80s. So, you know, very high-powered man. And he said that I asked unasked and invariably unanswered questions. Like, because I'll always ask the question like, why, you know, why is this like this, or why is that like that? Why all the time? And how could it be that this, the book says this or this? What does that mean? Yeah.
And so, being a person who has been involved with many different kinds of communities and learned and, you know, brought you much insight, what sort of advice or wisdom do you have for those who are searching for a spiritual community or in a spiritual community?
There's a subtle difference between what you're taught and what you learn. Now, what you learn is, let's say you do a yoga class and you think, my body feels great after that. That's something you've learned for yourself. What you're taught is how, you know, how to do the sun salutation, for instance, the order, how you do this thing. You know, and there's a difference. So you are the one who's responsible for your learning, and you get taught by different people in different environments at different times, but you're always the one who does the learning. You know, as a Rastaman, I might hear or might have heard some music, and I just think, oh, that's just fantastic. That's truth and right. That is really, and it's like a mantra. A mantra is a spiritual seed encased in the sound structure, and that's what music is, and that's what reggae music is. But then I might see the person who sung the song living some horrible, dirty life, and what am I going to do with that information? And I've still learned what I've learned. The Bible talks about trying to take the splinter out of your brother's eye and ignoring the big piece of wood that's in your own eye. So we're all sinners, we've all fallen short of the glory of God. So go and learn what it is that the universe is giving you. Go and learn what it means to, okay, Swami Shivananda says simple living and high thinking. What does that mean to you? You know, how can you improve this? You know, take small steps to improve yourself. How can I take small steps? What's the next step I need to take? I can't do it all. I can't give up whatever it is I need to give up maybe straight away. How can I get the strength to give it up? How can I reduce my dependence on it? Because that's spiritual work, and we're all engaged in that. And if we're not engaged in that, and then we start getting proud, like I'm already there. It's like in the 70s where there was a book, what they call pop psychology, it's called I'm Okay and You're Okay. And it had these 4 ways of relating to people. The first one is I'm okay, you're not okay. So you need my religion in the way that I think it should be in order to be okay. The second one is I'm not okay, but you're okay. So it's all right for you because you're this or that or this or that, and poor old me, come to my pity party. I'm not okay and you're not okay. Obviously, it's not really going to go anywhere because I'm not okay and neither are you. But I'm okay and you're okay is the best way that we can relate to each other as human beings. So that was the essence of the book. That was from the 70s. That's going back something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that clearly really stayed with you when you learned that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very simple lesson that, from my perspective, also I could see that applied to so many places where it is being sort of culture and people and the relationships between students, teachers, spiritual teachers, all of that is goes into a hierarchy or a way of looking at someone who's not okay. and that's sort of what you just brought in, kind of levels. It's like levels the playing field, levels the perspective.
That's right. So you're not going to feel, you're going to feel pity, but you're not going to really feel sorry for someone because they've got to fix themselves and their trauma themselves. You can't fix anyone else. So the Bible talks about us working out our own salvation in fear and trembling. So before we get too up ourselves because we got a robe or a uniform or a beard or whatever it is, a sexy body as well, you know, or clothes or cars or material success or whatever it is, you know, we should remember. One of the teachers, we were in yoga class, and he said, you know, don't think that people are in the yoga class because they're sorted out, because they're not. You know, we're all here because of our weakness and our fallibilities and our yearning to survive, our longing to survive. So that's really, and then I studied acupuncture and acupressure, And for about 5 years with a doctor called Dr. Yu in Camden here in London. And I had several clinics, and I'd say 90% of my clients were women, and a majority of them had been brutalized by male violence of various types. So here I am, a man, doing a physically intimate intervention, I suppose, massage is an intervention, with women who've been traumatized by male violence. So I mean, I had to go and talk to Dr. Yu about that, and how do you manage that, and how do you make that possible and therapeutic and safe? And he taught me a lot of things, lots and lots of things like that I learned to do. It's the same with corrections in yoga, I mean, you start a class, you can say, I don't know, put your hands on your knees. Okay, so if this is your first time, put your hand up. You've never been to yoga, and everyone sort of don't give you a clap, and they say, oh, welcome, And I'll say, if you don't want me to correct you, if you don't want me to touch you, can you just raise your finger of your right hand? So nobody else can see that you don't want to be touched, but I can see, so I won't touch you. And then corrections, again, when I was learning acupressure, like Dr. Yu would say, he pointed to another student, he said, look, you see his touch? It's very slightly indulgent. So giving someone a therapeutic massage and making love with somebody is different kinds of touch. And you can have an indulgent touch, and you cannot have an indulgent touch. So there's a difference, and you know what the difference is, because that's your intention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there anything else that you'd like to share about what you've learned in all the various spiritual communities that you've been part of?
Well, of course, the Shivananda center's like erupted into pandemonium. Well, no, it hasn't. A lot of women have come and said that they've been sexually abused as part of that community by people in authority, even the highest authority. The organization itself seems to want to try and sweep it under the carpet, and they seem to have used various strategies to exhaust and wear down and silence those who are alleging that they've been abused, rather than investigating the situation. At the same time, like quite recently, there was a big Christian apologist who, some of the women said that he was abusing them, and now his organization has issued a full apology. He's passed away now. But it does seem like we're in a time where what's in the darkness is coming to the light. So we all need to double down and, try and live a congruent life and try and walk our talk, because we're in a time of revelation, where things that's been hidden is coming to the light. I've never really been in a position where I've got that power over students or people. So I can't really say, honestly, can I, that I wouldn't get corrupted by it. But I have worked a lot as a therapist, and I just get the feeling that to do that, not that I would want to, I might get struck down by a bolt of lightning. There's a passage in the Bible that says God is not mocked. So if you're wearing a robe or a uniform or a beard or yeah, any of those sorts of things, and you're saying that you're this. So if you say that you're celibate and you've got a hidden life, that's like double trouble, isn't it, really? You better not say anything. It's better to not say anything. And in any case, I think, meditation shows us that you can't say it anyway. You can't say about God. You can't say what God is. You can't talk God. One of the things that Swami Shivananda said, which I liked, was an ounce of practice is worth tons of theory. Because reading about meditation is not meditation. Only meditation is meditation. And people say, well, how do you meditate? If someone says, how do you meditate? And I'll tell them or I'll show them. But sometimes when you talk about meditation, people say, oh yeah, I meditate on the bus. So you have to just leave it alone, because I've made the mistake of saying, well, no, that's not quite right. But then that sets up antipathy between you and the person. But it doesn't matter what your gender is, or what your race is, or what your background is, or what your religion is, or what clothes you wear. How you are is a much more subtle vibration that people can feel, even if they can't express. So I don't know how much sense that made, really. That's just
A lot of sense. Absolutely. And if you had a pinch of knowledge to pass along to me or our viewers in sort of like a sutra form, in a sentence or two, about spiritual community and a spiritual path, being on a spiritual path, what would that be for you?
I think it's an aphorism that Swami Shivananda wrote. I've mentioned it in this interview already, but it's simple living and high thinking. I think those two things will carry us a long way, really. How can we simplify our lives and be less reliant on things outside of ourselves? That's extremely challenging. How can we be simple living means being content, even content in the face of lack. So Rastafari are always saying, you give thanks. It's easy to give thanks when things are going well. It's much harder to give thanks when you're up against it. And high thinking is, is that right? Is that in my highest and best interests? Is it that in our highest and best interest? Is that in my clients' or my students' highest and best interests? If it isn't, and I know it, then, and I do it, that makes me a hypocrite. And, I think hypocrites have got further to fall, because they're setting themselves up as being, it's not like being a fitness guru or personal development guru. And of course, that's a massive industry in any case. If you're going to set yourself up as a spiritual teacher, I think then, you have responsibilities. But as I said before as well, I've never been in a situation where I've had throngs of adoring devotees. The director of the yoga center in Putney said, yeah, she was joking. She said, yeah, Shankara, she said, you want to be sitting on a throne fanned by peacock feathers eating pineapples, don't you? And that was, so there's that, you can get put on a pedestal, can't you? And if you're on a pedestal, that's a very dangerous place to be. Very dangerous place to be.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a lot of beautiful wisdom in there. And so I want to thank you so much for sharing your heart, your soul, your voice, everything that you've brought forward here today. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Yeah, most welcome.